Hello, Chess.com listeners. This is International Master Mark Ginsburg coming to you with the second Modern Benoni segment. If you recall, in the first segment, we did a very exciting game between two Amanovs, Mesgen and Zanabek, where we discussed the G3 Modern Benoni with a very topical piece sacrifice. We're trying to uphold Black's point of view in this sharp opening, and today we're going to be doing a strategy called the central strategy for White, which was recommended in Grandmaster Yermolinsky's book, The Road to Chess Improvement. Let's see the first couple of moves in the central strategy. We're going to be following a game between George Meyer, a German Grandmaster, a 2600 plus, and Vugar Gashimov, 2700 plus, from the European teams 2009. D4 for Meyer, knight f6, c4, e6. By the way, Gashimov is very booked up on the black side, so it pays to study his games to see the best road to take against various setups. Meyer plays knight f3. Gashimov offers to enter the Benoni with c5. White can decline with e3, and I recommend you take a look at a famous game between Paul Keres and Mikhail Tal, where Tal won that game from the USSR Championship, as a exemplary effort for Black to meet the rather passive e3 move. Meyer accepts the challenge with d5, and Gashimov plays d6. He can take on d5 next turn. There's no rush. Knight c3. He takes on d5 now. cd. g6. And at this point, Meyer plays the moves that sets up the popular central strategy. The central strategy is simply h3, e4, and bishop d3 in some order, and White hopes to crash through the middle. So Meyer plays h3, bishop g7, so far very theoretical, e4 as programmed, castles, bishop d3, and if Black slowly develops, White will just castle, put his bishop on f4, his queen on d2, his other rook will come over to e1, and he'll break in the middle with e5, and Black's queenside expansion is ineffective to meet this plan, as Yermolinsky showed in his book. However, Gashimov wants to change the course of the game and plays the immediate b5. This move is the right choice because it changes the complexion of the game, and it results in a very open and fluid position, whereas White was hoping for a slow strategic build-up. This move provokes a crisis, and in all lines, Black is all right. The two main alternatives now, as you might imagine, are knight takes or bishop takes. He can't really ignore the pawns because they would just expand and give Black an initiative if White does not remove the b5 pawn immediately. In the game, Meyer played bishop takes. First, let's take a look at the alternative before we get into the game. The alternative is knight takes. As you might imagine, the knight has been diverted to the side, and in this case it's correct to counterattack the e-pawn because the knight has been diverted. White has two moves. He can play his knight to d2, or he can castle. In this position, let's say White castles. Black will take on e4, and White can play his queen to a4. This attacks Black's central knight. But Black can pin the White knight in return, and by tactics he saves the material. If White unpins at this point, we can trade the advanced knight, bishop takes, and then we take back, and then knight to d7. And Black is okay here. Let's play a few more moves to see why. Let's say White supports his bishop. We kick the bishop. It comes into a threatening square. We move the rook away from attack. Let's say White plays his queen back to safety. We now unpin the d7 knight. Let's say white tries to activate his rook, and black simplifies, again using tactics, because after knight takes, bishop takes, of course the knight here is not really hanging because if white incautiously took it, bishop check would win the queen. So white can't do that. Let's go back a little bit. He can't take the knight, as we just saw. So perhaps he would attack the knight again with rook e1. But then black can support the advanced knight with f5. Black's knight and bishop coordinate very well, and he has pressure on the b file as well. And the bishop on c6 optically looks nice, but it's actually staring into space and blocked from re-entering the game by white's own pawn. So curiously enough, black has an initiative here, and it's rather difficult for white to get out of the bind. So black's very happy in this position. This variation is worth study because at every step of the way, black is using tactics to wriggle out of white's threats. Let's back up to the position that we got after knight takes b5. Okay, let's go back to here. Let's try this one more time. Let's play knight takes again. Now, what else could we do? We could play, black's going to play rook e8 to attack the pawn. Now, at this point, white doesn't have a lot of moves. Suppose he were to play the knight back to c3. In this case, black can execute a well-known trick. He can take the pawn anyway, and after knight takes, he can simply attack it, and he'll regain it with a good game. For example, suppose white counterattacked the queen. We can just ignore that with queen d7, and the knight on e4 is a goner, and black will have a very active and nice position. So knight to c3 on move 11 is not to be recommended. Let me go back to that position. Knight to c3 is not a good move due to the trick knight e4, and you should be aware of that as it may occur in your own games. So what else could white do? Well, let's see. Let's try castling one more time. Knight e4. Last time we played queen to a4, but black wiggled out of difficulties ingeniously by playing his bishop to d7 and later trading the knight. White could instead play rook to e1, which on the surface appears threatening, because if the knight on e4 retreats, the d6 pawn may become weak. Now, what to do? This is actually a well-known theoretical line, but it turns out black is all right. He should kick the knight on b5, gaining time. White cannot profit by taking black's knight because black would get a nice pawn structure on the queen side. So white's going to back his knight up to a3, hoping to come to c4 with the knight, which is a standard plan. Now knight f6. Let's say white takes. Black takes, lending additional support to the d6 pawn, which is sensitive. Let's say white regroups. What black needs to do is eliminate the people attacking d6. He starts with knight d7. Let's say white tries to bother the queen, which is a standard idea. We can interpose with that knight, which frees up the bishop to move. Let's say white were to play queen to b3 with some ideas of coming maybe with the queen to b6. At this point, black's all right. He can play queen to c7. Let's say white brings the rook to the open line. There's no real threat involved, so black can take time and kick the queen. Rook b8. White plays his queen back. Bishop d7. If you notice, black's pieces are nicely defending one another. The knights are defending each other, and the knight additionally defends d6. The white rook has no entry points, and the d-pawn is becoming a source of concern for white. It's becoming a little bit weak. This position is actually nice for black. Black is imperceptibly taking over the initiative. So the line cannot be recommended for white. if we go back and make some conclusions about knight b5, let's go back to the original position. Black plays b5. The conclusion we can draw is that diverting the knight offside with knight b5 is insufficient for advantage after the reply rook e8. Remember that knight c3 is not good due to knight e4, and castling leads to nothing after knight e4. Black has gained a center pawn in exchange for a wing pawn, and black's only potential weakness, d6, is easily covered. We saw in the analysis that black has extremely active game and might even hold out hopes of winning if white plays inaccurately. That's enough for knight b5. Let's go to Meyer's choice. Let me get back to the position here. It's always nice to back up to the beginning to reinforce the move order. Gashimov played d6 at this point. Knight c3, takes. g6, he prepares the central strategy. Gashimov develops. Meyer puts his pawn on e4. Castles, bishop d3. And at this point, black is castled and white is not yet castled, so it's time for the tactical blow b5. And Meyer plays the main move, which is bishop b5. Again, removing one of the defenders from e4. Black has at his disposal a tactical trick here, knight e4, and this move solves the problem of reaching a decent position, because this move does reach a decent position by force. White has nothing better than to take it, and black regains the piece with the tactic queen a5 check, which you see in many Benonis and King's Indians. In the Meyer-Gashimov game, Meyer interposed the f-knight. Many people probably are asking, why not put the e-knight back, forcing black to get rid of that nice bishop to get the piece back? It turns out that the move, knight c3, is actually very poor for a surprising reason. The surprising reason is black does give up the important bishop, but after queen b5, it turns out that it's very hard for white to develop. If white kicked the queen, black can just put the queen to c4 and attack white's c-pawn, and white still can't castle. And if white guarded it with some incredibly awkward move, first of all, black has the rook to e8 possibility, and second of all, he has bishop to b7 possibilities rounding up the d5 pawn. So the a4 move is not working, and on other moves, black has a great game. So we can conclude that this move is not a good idea. Let's take one final look. Can white do anything? Not really. If white blocked the e-file with bishop e3, black could reinforce the long diagonal with bishop a6, and that cuts out queen e2 defenses. And now white's king is seriously in trouble. Black is going to have a very easy time of it developing an attack. Suppose white put the knight to d2, threatening c4. Black can just pop the queen in, and clearly black is dominating. c4 would just be met by bishop to c4. So we can effectively rule out this knight to c3 interposition. Let me show you. But the good news is that knight c3, although very weak, you will see it in tournament games at lower levels, because white is programmed to think that eliminating this bishop gives white a good game. But in this case, it backfires horribly because white's king cannot get to safety, and his d5 pawn is very weak. So good to know that knight c3 is bad. And Meyer's move, let's take a look. Meyer's move, knight fd2, is really the only move to try to get anything. But as we see in the game, Gashimov will equalize. After queen b5, white really has to go for the knight d6 move. That cuts out rook e8 check because the knight on d6 guards that. So black has to move the attacked queen. The best square is a6, preventing white from castling. Meyer's knights dance around with knight on 2 to c4. And again, rook e8 check is not yet possible. And if we look at it, white has 6 pawns and black has only 5. But black has the bishop pair. If white were to eliminate the bishop pair, the remaining d6 pawn would become very weak. Furthermore, it's black's move, and Gashimov simply develops. This position is completely fine for black. White has no realistic way to make use of the extra pawn because his king is insecure, and again, he's lacking the bishop pair. At this point, Meyer takes the chance to castle, and Gashimov plays the knight to e5 to break up white's chain of knights. Now white can take on e5, but after bishop takes, white has nothing better than knight c8, which transposes to the game. So in the game, he takes on c8, rook a c8. He has nothing better than to take on e5. Let's say if we were to play knight e3, which is awkward looking, black can just pop into d3, a Benko gambit type of strategy, queen c2, for example, c4, supporting the knight. It's quite obvious black has a good game already. Rook d1, let's say rook fe8, let's say a3 to prevent any knight jumps, simply f5, and black is very good, with excellent play for the pawn. Let's go back to the game. Meyer didn't go for that unnatural looking knight e3, he just took. But after taking, black takes back. Black is still down a pawn, but if you notice, the bishop can have this beautiful outpost on d4, which we saw in the prior segment on the Amonov game. Black's bishop always had this beautiful supported outpost. That outpost shelters the white pawn from its own queen and makes the d5 pawn weak. Furthermore, the white bishop is stuck here because of the b2 pawn. So it's not a very nice position for white. It is equal, but it's not very pleasant. Meyer played rook e1. Gashimov just defended. Meyer just developed his bishop, hoping to divert the black bishop. If the black bishop went on some pawn hunting errand, later the d-pawn could advance and become very dangerous. That was what Meyer's hoping for. But Gashimov's not going to take the b-pawn under these circumstances. He just popped his bishop to the beautiful outpost. After bishop d4, black is fully equal, and white moved a rook to c1, a kind of a neutral move. Black blockaded the pawn securely and attacked it. And at this point, white counterattacks the black rook on e8. He's just playing for tactics. But black is able to move the rook part way towards exchange to e5. And this defuses white's ideas. The position is still equal. That attacks white's bishop. And of course, white cannot play bishop f4 because black can take the rook with check and then take the bishop. So that's not on. So he takes the rook off. Rook e5. Black takes with the queen. And white counterattacks the black rook. White's doing the best he can to keep the balance, and it is balanced. But actually, that's a success for black's opening. Black moves the rook to a safe square and has some notions at some point of grabbing on b2. White sets up a mating net on the back rank so that black's rook is pinned to the back rank for the time being. And black just backs up with the queen and counterattacks f2, which is a common motif in these positions. White defends f2. Black attacks the white queen. White stays on the back rank to make threats. Black takes the pawn off because a check could be met with just interposing. White gets his rook to the open file, threatening a checkmate. Black defends. Position is still balanced. It's instructive how Gashimov wins this game. Meyer's now tempted by an a-pawn, which you may have been wondering about, but he's diverted his queen to the wing, and now Gashimov sets up an ingenious tactical device to cause white some difficulties. Objectively, it's still balanced, but at this point, Gashimov can start to confound matters. Can you see his next move? a pseudo trap of the bishop with the move g5. The bishop looks trapped on h6, but in fact, white's queen can come back and tie itself to the black rook, so the white bishop is not really trapped. However, Gashimov has enough tactical resources to hold the balance. So the bishop trap is an illusion, and Meyer must have planned this. But black plays an ingenious move. Can you see a strong move for black? It's very interesting. The queen is stuck to the rook. The queen would like to take the bishop, but it can't. This bishop seems to be fine. So what can black do? The ingenious move is king to h8, improving the king, because now the rook has a definite threat of coming to g8, and then the bishop is in trouble. That's a very nice move. Meyer has to take action, and he liberates his bishop with h4. However, after gh, white's king is actually getting a little bit exposed because the g file is open. Now it's getting a little bit double-edged. However, white is still okay. White brings the bishop to safety. It looks like white has some kind of structural edge because of the doubled h-pawns, and white has a passed a-pawn which might advance and make a queen at some point. But typical of modern Benoni's, black's dynamics are enough to hold the game. And he actually went on to win. Let's see how he tricked Meyer. He brought his king up. That's actually a clever move, as we'll see. b3 for white. If white had seen what was coming, he would have, at this point, he would have traded everything and made a draw. After bishop e5, which was the correct move, everything comes off. And now black hits two pawns at once, and the position is completely drawn. Meyer should have gone for this drawn rook ending. This was his big chance to save it. Instead, he incautiously played b3. Now black plays rook d5, cutting that idea out. White brings his king out of the f-file pin, but it's not going to be very happy on h1 either. Black puts the queen to f5 with some notions maybe of h3. White counterattacks the black rook and has some ideas of queen check in some lines. Black cuts out the threats on h6 and renews possibilities of h3. He's using the dynamics of the position very cleverly. He's also threatening a rook check to pick up the bishop. White drops the rook back to prevent checks, and now black plays a really nice move. He plays h6, which on the surface has no point, but a deeper look reveals that black's bishop in some positions would like to go to g5, and it's a very nice waiting move, and white, not having a lot of time to the time control, just willy-nilly runs the pawn now. But now white's getting in an awful lot of trouble. Black pries the king open, and now white's got problems. If he plays king to h1, black can play his bishop to g5, and if he took, black took, he'd have to guard the mate with g3, and now black can pop into f5 again, threatening the f3 infiltration, and white really has no defense. His queen can't guard the infiltration, so he has to play a pawn, and when he has to play a pawn, you know it's over, because black can creep in with queen to d3, hitting the g-pawn, and then on king h2 guarding that, he can just pop into f3, and white can't take the pawn because of mate, so white is completely lost. A very nice variation. Let's go back. We have this position h3, and on h3, he didn't play king back to g1. Instead, he tried to make a queen, which is, I guess, the kind of thing you do in time trouble. You try to get counter chances where you can find them. But black is too fast here. The ingenious move bishop g5, which was set up by the h6, now white drops back, and black's pawn advances even further, and the doubled h-pawns are going to triumph here. White desperately tries to guard his king, and black hits the bishop again. At this point, white's king is fatally pried open, and Meyer went down quickly after bishop h2. At this point, can you see the end? It's effectively using the pawns, the h-pawns, for their maximum potential. You just take on g2, rook takes, and now the last pawn comes h3, and the f3 point is too vulnerable. He played rook g3. Now Gashimov can win by checks. Queen e4 check. f3 is forced. Rook d1 check. Bishop here, and the queen is hanging. This was probably the conclusion of the time control, and Meyer, of course, resigned, having lost his queen. Although the bishop is hanging, white's too much material down. To review what we learned, if we go back to the key position, which I'll quickly do, the key position was reached as early as the 9th move. Psychologically, it's very good in a tournament to put your opponent to a test early, especially when you're prepared. These sharp lines give black active play in all lines. Sometimes black has to wriggle a little bit or react to a threat, but the variation is quite viable and recommendable, as Gashimov showed you with this win over Meyer. You should be prepared for white's moves. The moves are knight b5, which we studied. Rook e8 is the right answer for that. Bishop b5, we studied that one. Knight e4 is the right answer to that. And on your own, you can verify that castling, ignoring the pawn moves, is going to lead to nothing. For completeness, we could mention what black's best play is. The best play is to kick the knight. Let's say white drop back. By far the easiest is just bishop a6, and black is ahead in development. White could take. Now black is fully developed and quite satisfied at his position. Of course, black doesn't have to play bishop a6. He could keep the bishops on and play differently. He could play his knight to d7, for example. Black is good in all these positions. So castles cannot be recommended. The only testing moves are to grab on b5 with one of the two minor pieces. And what we learned in this segment is that black can handle both of them. So I'd like you to go out and try this stuff. And I've set up a blog post on the chess.com revolving around the modern Benoni. I've already put up the Amanov game, and now I'll put up the Meyer versus Gashimov game from this segment so we can discuss and learn more as we try it in our own games. Because inevitably, when you try it in your own games, you'll encounter a new direction that we need to look at and analyze. So thank you very much. I'll be joining you with one final segment on a modern Benoni soon. Thanks a lot.